I never expected a simple knock on my door to change the way I looked at my life, especially not at a time when I had convinced myself that I was perfectly fine being alone. It was a cold Tuesday morning, the kind where the skies stayed gray and the rain tapped gently against the windows. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the garden outside and wondering when my house had become so quiet. Then I heard the knock. 3 soft knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. My son lived almost 2 hours away, and my friends had their own busy lives. So for a moment, I simply sat there listening. Then came another knock. I finally got up and walked toward the door. When I opened it, I found my neighbor Daniel standing on the porch. He was holding a small paper bag in one hand and an umbrella in the other. "Good morning," he said with a slightly awkward smile. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "No," I replied. "Is everything okay?" He looked almost embarrassed. "Actually, I noticed something yesterday." I frowned. "What?" He glanced toward my front yard. "Your porch light has been out for 3 nights." I looked up. He was right. I hadn't even noticed. I admitted. He smiled. "That's what I figured." Then he handed me the paper bag. "I brought you something." I looked inside. There was a warm loaf of homemade bread and a small container of soup. I stared at him. "Daniel, what's this?" "Nothing special," he said quickly. "I made too much." But somehow, I knew that wasn't the whole story. People don't usually notice when your porch light has been out. They don't usually notice when you stop sitting outside. And they certainly don't bring you homemade soup because of it. I thanked him, and he turned to leave. But before he reached the steps, I asked, "Daniel." He turned around. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He smiled, and his answer stayed with me for a very long time. Because sometimes people need someone to notice. Then he walked away. I closed the door slowly. And for some reason, those 7 words made my eyes fill with tears. Because the truth was, I had been hoping someone would notice for a very long time. For the past year, my life had become smaller. Not because anything terrible had happened. That was the strange part. There was no dramatic tragedy. No major disaster. Just little things. My husband had passed away 3 years earlier. My son had grown up and moved away. Friends who once called every week became people I occasionally saw at birthdays or holidays. And slowly, without realizing it, I had stopped expecting anyone to come. I stopped making plans. Stopped dressing up for dinner. Stopped planting new flowers. Even my garden, which had once been my favorite place in the world, had become something I simply looked at through the window. I told everyone I was doing fine. And technically I was. But being fine and being happy are not always the same thing. The next morning, I heard a strange noise outside. When I looked through the window, Daniel was standing beside my porch with a toolbox. I opened the door. "What are you doing?" He looked up. "Fixing your light." "You don't have to do that." "I know." He continued working. "But I want to." I watched him climb the small ladder. "You know," I said, "most neighbors would just tell me to call an electrician. Most neighbors probably don't have an electrician who lives 2 houses away." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd had in days. Maybe weeks. He looked down at me and smiled. "There, that's better." "What?" "That smile." I looked away, suddenly embarrassed. "You pay too much attention. Someone should." And there it was again, that strange feeling. Someone was noticing me, not because they needed something. Not because I was somebody's mother or someone's widow. Just because I was me. Over the next few weeks, Daniel started appearing in small ways. Sometimes he left fresh vegetables from his garden at my door. Sometimes he would wave while walking past. Once, he knocked simply to ask if I'd seen the sunset. At first, I thought he was just being friendly. Then one Saturday morning, he showed up carrying 2 wooden flower boxes. "I thought we could put these under your windows." I laughed. "You're becoming very involved in my house." He smiled. "Your house has been looking lonely." I looked at him. He immediately realized what he'd said. "I'm sorry." "No," I whispered. "Don't be." He set the flower boxes down, then helped me fill them. So we planted flowers together. It was such a simple thing. Two people kneeling in the dirt on a Saturday morning. But somehow it felt important. We talked about everything. Books, music, food, our childhoods, the places we'd traveled, and eventually, the people we'd lost. Daniel told me about his wife, who had passed away several years earlier. I thought I'd never be able to laugh again, he said quietly. I looked at him. Do you still miss her? Every day. He paused. But missing someone doesn't mean you have to stop living. I didn't answer, because those words hit somewhere deep inside me. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. I had been carrying a box of old photographs in the attic when I slipped on the stairs. The box fell, photographs scattered across the floor, and I sat there staring at them. There were pictures of my husband, my son, as a little boy, birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations, a life that seemed to belong to someone else. I started crying, not quietly, not politely. I cried the way you cry when you've been holding everything inside for too long. Then I heard a knock. I couldn't answer. Another knock. Are you okay? It was Daniel. I wiped my face. Yes. He opened the door slightly. I know you're not. And for some reason, that was enough. I finally said, come in. He sat beside me on the floor. He didn't try to fix anything. He didn't tell me everything would be okay. He simply looked at the photographs with me. After several minutes, he picked up one picture. It showed my husband and me standing in the garden many years earlier. You loved him, Daniel said. Very much. He nodded. Then you should never feel guilty for missing him. I looked at him through my tears. But sometimes I feel like moving forward means leaving him behind. Daniel shook his head. No. He placed the photograph gently back into the box. Moving forward means carrying the love with you. I didn't know what to say, because nobody had ever explained it that way. That evening, after Daniel left, I walked into my garden. For the first time in almost a year, I picked up my gardening gloves. I pulled the weeds, trimmed the roses, watered the flowers. And when I finished, I stood there looking at the garden. It wasn't perfect. Neither was I, but both of us were alive. And maybe that was enough. A few months passed. My porch light was no longer broken. The flower boxes were overflowing. And my front door had become a place where people actually came and went. Sometimes Daniel brought coffee. Sometimes I cooked dinner. Sometimes we sat outside without saying much at all. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, Daniel looked at me. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you stop living? The question caught me completely off guard. I looked down at my hands. I thought I was protecting myself. From what? From losing someone again. He nodded slowly. I understand. Then he reached across the table. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just gently, and took my hand. I can't promise you'll never lose anyone again. My heart tightened. But I can promise you don't have to be alone while you're here. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time, I realized something. The unexpected kindness that had surprised me wasn't really about soup, or flowers, or a broken porch light. It was about being seen, about having someone notice when your world had become a little too quiet, about realizing that sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives carrying a paper bag of soup. Sometimes it knocks 3 times. Sometimes it simply says, someone should notice. A year after that first knock, I woke up early one spring morning. The rain was gone. Sunlight was pouring through the kitchen window. I made 2 cups of tea. Then I walked outside. Daniel was already in the garden, planting flowers. He looked up. You're awake early. I smiled. I wanted to see the sunrise. He stood and walked toward me. How is it? I looked around, at the flowers, at the house, at the porch, at the man standing in front of me. It was beautiful. Then I realized something. A year ago, I had been sitting at the same kitchen table, drinking tea and wondering why my life felt so empty. Today, the same house felt completely different. Not because the house had changed, because I had. I had learned that loneliness can become a habit. And sometimes All it takes is one person noticing you to remind you that you're still part of the world. Daniel squeezed my hand. Coffee. I smiled. Coffee. We walked back toward the house together. And as I opened the door, I glanced at the porch light. The same light he had noticed a year before. It was still shining, bright and steady. And somehow, I knew it wasn't just a light on my porch anymore. It was a reminder that even after the darkest seasons of our lives, something beautiful can still find its way back in, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes quietly, and sometimes with nothing more than a knock at the door. Final question. If you were in my position, would you have allowed Daniel into your life, or would you have been afraid to start again? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more heartfelt stories about love, kindness, second chances, and the unexpected moments that can change our lives.